It is time for Songwriter Studio. I'm your host, Tom Tranchilla. Thank you so much for tuning in. Fresh from the Southwest Regional Folk Alliance, just returned the other day. We've got myself with Holly Hagerman, who was one of the panel discussion persons at the conference, and I talked Holly into joining us live on Songwriter Studio. How you doing, Holly?
Hi, great. I'm so happy to be here in this beautiful studio.
Yes, this is Lloyd's Palace here. We love it here. We're going to certainly miss it when we have to go live at the KPFT studios. Holly, I was so interested in your panel discussion at the conference. I asked you to join us here on Songwriter Studio. Let the listening audience know a little bit about your company, what you do, and why you do what you do.
Well, so the panel that you heard was called How to Make More Money as a Musician, and that's a big part of what we're doing. So Amped Up is a mission-based company with three primary goals. The first is to make it easier for musicians and independent venues to make a living. Second is to diversify the stage and make it easier for women, people of color, LGBTQ musicians to have a fair shot at the stage. And third, and this is especially close to my heart, is to make any city a music city. So we support those three goals and those three parts of our mission by creating a steady stream of grants from our revenues for musicians and venues. So that's basically what we do. It feeds right into that panel discussion because it's very important to us to make sure that we're supporting musicians and venues, especially coming out of the pandemic and shutdown. And so for venues, especially, it's helping them find, book, and build relationships with the musicians and streamline the process as well.
You know, we've had this discussion off the air and during the panel. I'm a little older than you, and for the musicians in my age group that have been performing most of their lives, the technical side of it is very difficult. And when you reach a certain age, and when we're not born and raised in the technical side of the industry or technical computer savvy, it becomes very difficult to learn. Teach old dogs new tricks makes it even worse. Now, I found your seminar very, very interesting because this is exactly the knowledge that we need to survive in the music business. You had mentioned to help cities grow in their music. We recently had John in Houston on the air. He was discussing how we can bring some of the festivals back to the Houston metro area. And this is one of your goals as well, to help these cities more supportive of the independent artist and music in general. Why don't you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, you know, the third part of that mission is really critical to everything that we do. It really speaks to building the community of musicians and venues, which have come together like never before in the pandemic to survive and to seek funding. But that part of the mission came about because both in Portland and in Houston, I hadn't really fully experienced the music scene. So in Houston, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking, that I grew up within earshot of the Cynthia Mitchell Woods Pavilion in the Woodlands and experienced big stadium type music, but not really the independent scene and the smaller scene that really is the backbone of a vibrant culture. And then also in Portland, I had a friend that ended up leaving Portland that we were very close with, both him and his wife. And a big part of it was that there just wasn't a strong music scene is what he felt at the time. And so he moved down to LA to pursue his craft. And that really touched me. And so when we started working on this business, those two cities combined, one is one of the largest cities in the nation. The other one is a lot smaller, but has a very different cultural vibe, and neither of them being recognized for the music. But you have people in those cities that deserve to make a living and a healthy living at that. And societally, we need to take a look at what it means to be a music city, to have music as part of your daily life, to have that percolate in our culture. So that's part of our mission.
Back to the technical side, I had mentioned earlier that many people like myself are technologically challenged as far as getting on all these new social media platforms in order to promote your music. A lot of us, like in my case, I've recorded 4 albums the past 20-some years, and other than selling them at my gigs, this whole social media and getting my music on these various platforms is like a foreign language. Just learning who to hire or to do myself is a real challenge and kind of a dead end for a lot of musicians in my shoes. But your company is addressing this. So let's just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think that being tech savvy is not something that all musicians are going to be, but as you said, that it's something that's pretty critical for their careers to advance, is to understand all of these platforms, especially the social ones. And so we specifically designed our site to make it as easy as possible for musicians and venues to bring their live music booking into the modern world. And because a lot of them, we have a number of them that are actually signed up on the platform that handwrite all of their bookings in a calendar and leave it in the bar. So that is still common. There's still a lot of musicians that are getting paid by check, or a lot that have to wait until the end of the night to get paid. And so there's sort of two different ways to look at this technology. On one side, you've got Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and all of these, and musicians are really tasked with trying to game the system and game those algorithms so that they can get ears on their music and eyeballs on their brand and who they are. In this case, it's a little bit different because our technology is really supporting the most critical part of a musician's career, which is the live music part and getting those bookings. Most musicians, even the largest ones, like I think it might have been in 2019 or 2018, the top grossing musicians I think were Garth Brooks, U2, and another one, and they got 80 to 90% of their revenues from live music performance. And that is very common for the vast majority of musicians, whether they're represented or independent. So paying attention to that side of things and modernizing it with technology, especially for venues. I was just speaking to one recently, musicians from a venue that were constantly getting double booked. That is a reality that still happens today. They lose out on the money that they would have made on that night that they get double booked at that venue. So, there's kind of two different sides of it, the social side and then the sort of efficiency side of getting their bookings going.
I remember during the seminar that I sat in on this past weekend, you were targeting not only the musicians but the venues as well. And this is also to their advantage to use these services. Expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so we thought long and hard about how this is going to work and how we're supporting each side. We spent hundreds of hours of deep listening. In a way, the pandemic gave us an opportunity there because everybody was completely shut down when we started these conversations. We'd sit down and have 3-hour-long conversations with some of the top independent venues. And so we got a chance to really do some deep listening. This tool is completely free for small independent venues. And, when looking at what has happened and the crisis that is existing for live music industry professionals, it's difficult to say that one got hit harder than the other. But I think that we can all argue that small independent venues, while they did finally receive some funding, they were not able to just go out and get another job. They had employees that they had to think about. They had rent that was due and utilities that had to be paid and repairs that needed to be made. They couldn't just walk away as easily as some, and this is certainly not for all, but as some musicians could temporarily get another job. And so supporting those venues is really important to us. Modernizing their tools, because now coming back from the pandemic, they are stretched to the max. Absolutely stretched to the max, both financially and from a time management perspective. They're understaffed, they're doing multiple jobs at one time. And so giving them tools that make them more efficient is going to be a big part of helping them recover.
While you're on that subject, there's a lot of venues around the Houston areas that did not survive the pandemic and that are closed for good. We've got our good friends at JP Hop's House survived the pandemic, and then the fire destroyed their building. So they're still trying to get back on their feet, like so many of the other venues around town. I know that there was a chain of restaurants here that at one time called Gabby's. Well, they shut their music down altogether. So a lot of the venues where the independent artists who barely get by don't have the venues to go back to. So a company like yours could step in and say, okay, we've got these new tools. Let's get these places back up and running. Give us the website address. Where do they go to get more information?
Ampedup.com. And
Spell
that's
it.
AMPTUP.com. Amped Up.
You're from the Portland area. You used to live here, like you had mentioned. This can be accessed nationwide, correct?
It is accessible to anybody, but we're really focusing our resources in Austin, where we launched, and in Portland, Oregon as well. So we want to make sure that we're investing our human resources as well to go out, personally meet with the venues and the musicians. We meet with every single person that is on our platform. So if somebody does want to get access to it, wants to be granted access to the site, then they could just go onto our website, click Get Started, and then they'll meet with either myself or Victoria or somebody else from our team to help walk them through how the tool works, how to set up the profile. It's all DIY and completely intuitive, but we want to make sure that we're there because this is a very big change for a lot of musicians and venues. To implement this technology for themselves.
Let's talk a little bit about your husband is and used to be a full-time musician. Is that correct? And certainly this had some influence on you diving into this business.
That's right. Yes, he spent a couple decades in the live music scene as a musician in Europe. He's French, and he started out with a garage band with his two brothers and playing French Celtic music, and they had a lot of fun with that. Went on to play and tour nationally throughout Europe and played in front of thousands of fans. And then he transitioned out of that as he got older and started doing sound engineering, backline technician work for some of Europe's greatest venues like the Monte Carlo, Cannes Film Festival. So he really has both sides of the coin in terms of knowledge and perspective.
Well, since most of his day job work was in Europe, do you plan on expanding across the pond?
We definitely do, yeah. But a big part of that isn't necessarily just where our resources are, although we have great resources over there in the music industry. But really, in order for us to serve our mission, we really need to be in as many places as possible and saturate it in a way so that it's a tool that is widely used. So we have a tour routing tool where musicians can actually put points on a map and then put filters in of the type of venues that they want to play at, such as capacity, genres, type, and then they will actually get a list of all of the venues in those areas, their contact information, so that they can pitch them whether or not they're on our platform. So we have one of the largest databases of venue contact information with over 7,000 contacts that have been manually hand-culled and reviewed by an actual human being for the Southeast region and the West Coast, and we're expanding that as well. So it's important to us that we are in as many places as possible so that our musicians can go out and tour and easily have the technology to support them when they go.
That's incredible. I don't know how long it took to build that database, but you have a fairly young company here, so a lot of work. Let's talk a little bit about your business background. I know you, at one time, you were part of the Green Rising Marketing. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that was my first company, and I had that for over a decade out of Portland, Oregon, and it was a marketing and branding and digital marketing company specifically for environmentally friendly and socially responsible companies. And so it was a small boutique agency, and we served some really wonderful and also somewhat large local companies, multi-million-dollar local companies, and multi-billion-dollar global companies that were Fortune 500 companies that were on some of the world's most admired lists, the Fortune World Most Admired list, I believe it was. So that was a great precursor to this business because I was working with a lot of digital technologies and also understanding the principles very thoroughly of marketing. And that's a primary part of making this business work for us, but also in understanding venues and musicians and what they're going through, what changes they need to make in their marketing to be more successful. And that's part of the genesis of those panels that you heard.
Which is what I was getting at. You're not new at the whole technology field business. You basically shifted gear, pushed this all toward the music business, and it all fits together almost like a hand in glove. So.
Well, that's right. But, I don't think I mentioned this to you earlier, but this business actually started in a completely different way. So I had my business, Green Rising Marketing, and my husband had wanted to start a small rehearsal studio space with a cafe and a bar like the one he had grown up with in France. They have a really great support, especially government support for the music industry and the arts there. And so he had wanted to create that where we lived. And so we had been working on that business plan for a while and thinking about it, and we're really working towards bringing that to fruition when the pandemic hit. And I was sitting around on a dark and stormy night when the whole world was dark and shuttered, working on the business plan for that. And there was a bit of a light bulb moment where I just realized, all of our friends, our musician friends, had lost their livelihoods overnight, tens of thousands of dollars in business for their music careers, gone, not sure if it would return or when. And it just suddenly felt like it wasn't enough. And so I had all of this experience in digital marketing, and I also had been studying marketplaces and how they work, and had always wanted that my next career or business would be a way to help people make money easier and earn a livelihood. And it just seemed like a natural pivot. And so that night I didn't go to sleep and didn't sleep for the next month, and started working on this like a mad woman, and we started building it together.
The gears started turning, and they haven't slowed down, have
That's
they?
right, yes.
I really appreciate what you're doing. I would definitely like my listening audience to go to your site, ampedup.com, amptup.com. Check out what you have to offer. Now, is this a fee service for the musicians? Or I know you had already mentioned it's a non-fee for the venues. Mm-hmm. So this is a for-profit, basically, and hopefully their return will be a livelihood.
That's right. Yeah. So it is a for-profit mission-based company, and we did deep research on how and who and when we would be able to support the business with some sort of business model. And so we asked our musicians, we asked the venues, and ultimately what we decided was that we would charge the musicians a fee per booking, but that we wouldn't add any subscription fees in. And that was specifically intentional because of a number of reasons. Most importantly, we want to level the playing field and make sure that everybody, all of the musicians, have equal access to all of the tools, no matter where they are in their career or whether or not they come from a wealthy background, that they're not going to have tiered access to tools that will make them more successful. And so we wanted to ensure that there were no subscription fees, which are generally hated by musicians for other music platforms that are out there. It's something that we heard from them, so we listened. So there is a small per booking fee that is added just to the musician side. It's free to the venues because they're making this whole party happen. And then a portion of that is returned into grants that we'll be giving away.
Oh, excellent. And you're not going to profit unless the musician profits as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's no fees to them. There's no risk. A lot of people keep telling us this is a no-brainer. There's literally no reason I can actually think of why you wouldn't do this, because there's no risk to either side to sign up, and it's simply a 5-10 minute process, and then to keep it updated with your calendar so people can see when you're available and can book you.
One more thing, do you offer online platform conferences or whatever you call it to promote the business and explain in detail exactly what you do, similar to what you did at the Southwest Regional Folk Alliance?
We do, actually. So if you go to our website and you sign up on the newsletter, or if you want to go to our Instagram or our Facebook or Twitter, you can follow us there. It's Amped Up Music. So we have these events regularly. Again, one of the founding ideas, that rehearsal studio, cafe, and bar space, the one that was modeled in France, also had a very strong nonprofit educational component to it. They actually had a whole center for musician education. So I think that that's sort of embedded in our DNA as well, is to make sure that musicians and venues can both profit from the knowledge that we've gotten. They were so generous with their time to help us understand what are the problems. Why did it feel that the music industry was at a breaking point before the pandemic? And so we've gleaned all of that knowledge, and we have a really unique perspective, having not been a musician, but being able to talk and interview a venue venue, we can now share all of that knowledge that we've learned back with them. So we have frequent webinars, generally once a month, that they can join, and they can join our newsletter and get that information.
I love what you're doing. I wish you very much success. Thank you so much for spending a little time with us here on Songwriter Studio. Thank you also for coming to the Southwest Regional Folk Alliance and letting us know about this. This could be really earth-shaking for some of these musicians that are out there really struggling to find work right now. One more time, that website address is?
ampedup.com. That's AMPTUP.com. And you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at Amped Up Music. And thank you so much for having me. It worked out perfectly. And as I mentioned, I'm a fifth generation Houstonian, so it was perfect timing for me to roll back to home and be able to join you in this beautiful studio.
Before you head back to Portland, Oregon,
That's right.
Which, by the way, Ken Gaines and Wayne Wilkerson are both moving there here in the next 6 months, so we're losing a couple of our top-notch songwriter/guitarists out of the Houston area. So I hope to make it up to Portland someday.
Well, we'll give them a warm welcome.
Yes, you certainly will. Thank you so much for being our guest on Songwriter Studio.
It's such a delight. Thank you for having me.
I know you already gave that website address, but can you do it one more time?
Sure thing, happily. It's ampedup.com, AMPTUP.com.